Hey, this is Ask Grimala right here on the Las Vegas Sun's Facebook account. This is the Las Vegas Sun newsroom, and this is Grimala, our UNLV basketball and football writer. And you know what, Mike? Tomorrow, start of the NCAA tournament. A lot of folks are coming to town. They're wearing their school T-shirts. They're proud. UNLV, though, missing the tournament for the 5th straight year. A lot to talk about. We're going to talk football and basketball, but basketball just ended. Give us a fair assessment of Marvin Menzies. Year 2, some people say it's year 1, but a fair assessment of UNLV basketball right now.
A big step forward from where they were last year, not as big of a step as it could have been. Like, there were some pieces that they could have performed better in Mountain West play. They underperformed the talent that they had on hand, but in the grand scheme of things, in the big picture, the program is moving forward. So maybe not as fast as people expect or as fast as people want.
Yeah, and I think we were kind of teased a little bit at the beginning of the year. They opened, I think they were like 11-1, 11-2. They had that great win against Utah at T-Mobile Arena. And some of us, including you and I, or especially me, we were like, hold on, the Mountain West is kind of down. There's a way they can navigate this thing and potentially compete for the league or win the league. And then they kind of fell off a little bit. What happened there to where it started, I think, at San Diego State. They lost by a lot of points. Did they just run out of gas, or how do you explain it?
There were a couple phases of the Mountain West season. At first, it seemed like it took the players a little while to understand how intense the league was, how competitive it was. They lost some games just on intensity early in the season, and they started slow. They put it all together about midway through the Mountain West play. They won 5 out of 6. They won at Reno. They beat San Diego State. They snapped, a 11-game losing streak to San Diego State, and those were big wins, and it looked like they had it rolling. Then they got into the final 5-game stretch, and that's when scheme and some other things caught up to them, and sort of scouting reports, other teams caught up to what UNLV was doing, and they were able to exploit them, and UNLV just, they slumped, and they closed the season very badly, and they were never able to get it going again before they were eliminated in the Mountain West tournament.
All right, so this is Ask Grimala. We do this maybe 4 or 5 times a year where we give you, the readers of LasVegasSun.com, the opportunity to ask Grimala. We solicited some questions ahead of time. I have those right here. But if you want to hop in now, use the hashtag AskGrimala on Twitter or just right here under the Facebook Live video, and we will get your answers right away. Mike, we start with UNLV Rebel Girl, and her question is what everybody wants to know. When do you think Brandon Mccoy will announce his decision to stay or declare for the NBA draft? Of course, Mccoy, the freshman McDonald's All-American, the big get for Marvin Menzies, Mountain West Freshman of the Year, double-double, projected as being a first-round pick. What's the latest on Brandon McCoy?
Well, the dates are set. I believe it's April 9th. You have until April 9th to declare for the NBA draft and explore your options and try out for teams and work out and get some feedback. And the date to pull your name out of the draft is April 29th. So that's the very latest that you could know. McCoy hasn't seemed throughout the season that he's been sort of on the fence. The vibe that I get is that he was a one and done from the start. He had a great season. Really, nothing went wrong that would deter him from that one and done plan. So I don't think it should take him that long to make up his mind. He said after the season ended, he hadn't thought about it, and he hadn't really. He wanted to talk to his family and his advisors and that sort of thing. But it shouldn't. April 29th is the absolute latest. It should not take that long.
Yeah, and I think the general consensus is it'd be upset if he decided to stay for another year.
It would be a huge upset if he came back. It's 95% gone, 5% coming back. Long odds.
Sure. Our next question from Floor Day Canna Kid. He wants to know, with Jordan Johnson, JoJo, your guy, Javon Mooring, and potentially McCoy leaving the program, who are going to be the next players to leave? Anthony Smith, possibly, or some players at the end of the bench who didn't get the playing time they deserved or they thought they deserved. So who are the guys who aren't going to be there next year?
Well, Anthony Smith is the obvious name. He was suspended early in the season. We didn't see him again in the entire second half. He's been away from the program. They've already added an incoming recruit to take that scholarship. So my guess is that he would be one of the departing players. There are a couple of guys that are on the end of the bench. They redshirted this year. Ben Coupet and Georgi Slovanchinin, who actually they played as freshmen and then redshirted before their sophomore seasons, which is not unheard of, but somewhat unusual. If they want another opportunity to play elsewhere, they've both been recruited over. There are better players ahead of them on the roster and more coming in. So those are two guys to watch if other scholarships need to be opened. And then it seems like, with every college basketball team, whether you're winning or whether the program's down, there's just turnover. There's always a surprise or two. There's always a transfer that you're not expecting or something along those lines. So those would be the two guys that I would watch, but they wouldn't be the only two if someone else were to leave for a better situation. It wouldn't be surprising.
Hundreds of kids leave college to go to another one every year. It's the norm in college basketball. I think what we're seeing here with UNLV is you go back to when Menzies was hired. It was late in the game in April, and he had to recruit a bunch of players, guys who redshirt as sophomores who you kind of just had to take, you know what I'm saying?
Guys who were available because they hadn't been recruited by other schools at that point. It was so late in the process. The only people that were left were the guys that were left over from, that no one else wanted, basically. And, they're trying to stick around. I don't know, Menzies may think that they bring something to the program, but those are the guys you would want to watch in terms of potential transfers.
All right, we got our first question from Facebook. Peter Tomasic, my man, how's it going, brother? He wants to know, like everybody else, Grimala, and you've given me 5 pages of questions, and this has been mentioned as well, but is Coach Menzies, and Peter refers to him as Marvelous, on the hot seat?
No, it's been one season for Marvin Menzies. Like we said, his first season, he had to throw together a team, something like 8 or 9 newcomers just that off season because there were so many players left when Dave Rice was fired, and then when Chris Beard left. He had to bring in an entirely new roster very late in the recruiting season, guys that were not wanted by other programs, JUCO guys, Division II JUCO guys, high school players that had been planning to play a prep year, like a Ben Coupet, like a Zion Morgan, guys that are not really Division I players, but Menzies had to take them to field a team. So you have to sort of throw that first year out the window. Year 2 was a step forward. I mean, they won 20 games. Underperformed in the Mountain West, but at least showed that they could be competitive. They beat the league champion. They beat the regular season champion in Nevada. They beat San Diego State, which is the conference tournament champion. So they at least showed that they could be competitive in the league. That's progress to me. Like, it may not be as much progress as people want, but I wouldn't. That you can't put Marvin Menzies on the hot seat after a season like that.
And unfortunately, Facebook followers, we don't have a 7-second delay here. I apologize for Grimala's swearing to you. It's UNR. He'll be scolded later in HR for saying Nevada. Next question. Everybody wants to know about recruiting. Their class is real solid right now. The folks they have signed, players like Trey Woodbury, the local kid, I think is going to be here for 4 years. But our guy Zachary Moramini wants to know, are they still recruiting for 2018? Who should we look out for?
That's a scholarship question. They've got 4 players that you can expect to be leaving. They've got the 2 senior guards. They've got Brandon McCoy. They've got Anthony Smith. Those 4 guys coming out. They've got 3 freshmen coming in Woodbury, Bryce Hamilton, Joel Ntambwe, and they've also got Noah Robotham, who spent the season redshirting and paying his own way, and he may be due a scholarship next year. They may want to put him on scholarship because it seems like he's going to play a big role. So there's 4 out and 4 in. I'm sure coaches always monitor the recruiting class in case something happens, in case another spot opens up. So I would never say that they're completely done recruiting for 2018. It may not be high school guys. It could be junior college players. It could be grad transfers who have 1 year left to play and can be eligible immediately. It depends on if Menzies thinks he has a need that he wants to fill. He can go with those more veteran players and maybe bring in someone like that over the summer.
Okay. Rebel Rain 1 wants to know, talking about just the offense and defensive schemes the Rebels run, do you see Menzies implementing a new offense or defense next season? He, and don't know if he knows basketball or if he's a good coach, but he doesn't believe the system the Rebels are using right now is proven to work.
Well, Marvin Menzies has been coaching for a long time. It's like a long time. He's won a lot of games. He's been to the NCAA tournament a bunch of times. He doesn't strike me as the sort of guy who's going to say, hey, we won 12 more games than we won last year. Let's completely change everything that we're doing because we didn't win the Mountain West in my first year with a competitive team. You can always tweak things. You know, the Rebels had some weaknesses that are well known by this point. You know, they need more shooting. They need to make 3-pointers. They need to be a better defensive team. Those are things that you can tweak. But a complete overhaul, I wouldn't expect it. And I mean, the things that Marvin Menzies promised, which is an up-tempo offense, a fast-paced, high-scoring, he delivered on that. I mean, they were top 20 in the country in points per game and efficiency. So, I mean, he's brought a good offense. I don't see any reason to overhaul that.
Slight follow-up question from Rebel Rain 1. I think a lot of folks deep into recruiting want to know about Jay Green's brother.
Yeah, Josh Green for 2019. Last summer when they had all the AAU tournaments in Las Vegas, I saw him play a few times, and he was the best player that I saw of any class, 2018, 19, 20. His brother, Jay Green, is on the roster, which sort of means that whenever you see something like that happen, you're going to be in the finals. Like when Josh Green announces his final 5 colleges or his final 4, or the school that he's going to, it's probably a good bet that UNLV will be in the mix somewhere. So it's a little early. I don't think he's gotten that deep into his recruiting yet, but I would keep an eye on it. That's someone that could be a huge addition. It would probably be up there with McCoy or even exceed McCoy in terms of impact as a freshman recruit. So definitely someone to watch.
Okay, so the narrative with UNLV this year, Mike, was they were off to this great start, 11-1 or 2, and part of that was the schedule didn't have many tough opponents outside of, I think, a Utah, Arizona at home, which they took into overtime. And even if they would have won 24 or 25 games, they still were going to need to win out in the Mountain West tournament to make the NCAA tournament. So on Facebook, Cody Furtado, I think I'm saying his name right, has a question. Do you expect a much stronger schedule next year out of conference? And that same question was also asked ahead of time on Twitter by Sainsworth, at Sainsworth.
Much stronger. That's sort of a hindsight thing. We don't know how good these teams are going to be until they get on the court and play next season. But I know that UNLV is set to play in the Diamond Head Classic next year, which is an 18 tournament in Hawaii. Other teams in that field are TCU, Rhode Island. Those are NCAA tournament teams this year. St. Mary's, which won I think 27 games this season. So that's a strong tournament. They're playing in that. I believe they've got a road game at Illinois next year, so that's another chance for them to get a road win out of conference against a Power 5 team. Is that going to be enough to give them an at-large type of resume? Probably not, but if the Mountain West continues to get better and UNLV wins a bunch of games, you can at least maybe get into that conversation if you perform well in that out-of-conference schedule.
There was news that came out yesterday that Lynn Jessup is battling with the Board of Regents. He's got a year and a half or so left on his contract, to be announced if he's here or if he's not going to be here. But folks want to know the impact. If Jessup were to leave, they've got multiple questions. One, do you think they pull the plug on the logo? But two, and you and I kind of talked about this offline, new president comes in, they look at athletics right away. Do you think there'd be a change to football or basketball?
Well, the situation you would find yourself in if Len Jessup is replaced and there's a new president coming in is that you would now have a president and an athletic director who inherited both of their coaches. The president and the AD didn't hire the football coach, they didn't hire the basketball coach, and so obviously both of those sports would be up for review. I mean, you'd have to reassess it. Anyone who comes in is going to want their own spin on it, their own stamp. If they've got someone in mind or a certain direction they want the program to go in. If Menzies is winning a bunch of games by the time that happens, then you can just roll with him. If Tony Sanchez has got the program turned around and they're winning and they're building practice facilities, then you stick with them and you ride it out. But if they're still struggling, of course a new president and a new athletic director are going to say, hey, it might be time for us to look into hiring our own people. But that's if the programs struggle. If they win, they should be set.
All right, we'll kind of shift gears here on Ask Grimala. Remember, if you want to ask him a question, use Ask Grimala on Twitter, or just right here on the Facebook feed. Let us know what you're thinking. UNLV football spring practice. There are 3 practices in out of 15, and they've got 4 new defensive coaches. So they recognize they were weak defensively. They've gone out. They've got a new defensive coordinator, new safeties coach, new defensive back coach and a new linebacker coach. Any inkling yet on terms of how the defense may look, or what are they doing differently, or how are they changing the message defensively?
It's for UNLV last year. I know that they weren't as aggressive as Tony Sanchez wanted them to be defensively. He's a guy who is very energetic, and he wants to be aggressive, and he wants to dictate the terms of the game to the opponent. On offense, they were able to do that most of the time. Defensively, they just didn't really impact the game in any way. It was more of a read and react type of system. So they brought in a new defensive coordinator, and his orders are basically get more pressure on the quarterback, make the other team scramble a little bit, disrupt what they're trying to do. It's spring practice is too early to assess whether that's going to work or whether they even have the talent on hand to do that. I mean, that was UNLV's major problem on defense last year. They don't have that sort of athletic talent. They don't have the speed and the power to sort of run a scheme like that. Do they have it now, 1 year later? I'm skeptical.
When they lose their best defensive player in Mike Hughes Jr., the defensive lineman?
Yes. Yeah, so it's you're going to have to see it on the field first. The entire team is not here for spring practice. They've got guys that are coming later in the year. You won't see the full team until training camp in the fall. But scheme-wise, they do want to change, and they do want to get more aggressive.
Yeah, and, 1 year it was they couldn't rush the quarterback. They were like 119th nationally in sacks. The next year they couldn't defend anybody through the air. They gave up long touchdown after long touchdown. They had 4 or 5 interceptions. Like, literally, players had more interceptions on other teams than UNLV had for the entire year. So any improvement, I think, could push them over the bowl eligibility threshold, which is kind of where many people think UNLV needs to be next year. They think Sanchez needs to get to a 6th win, a bowl eligibility. They look at some of the ugly losses, whether it was Howard or blowing a lead against UNR, and they're okay. This guy's got to win. Is this kind of Sanchez's do or die year coming up in 2018?
It's got to keep going forward. If he were to win fewer games, if they were to win 4 games or 3 games this season, that would be a big step back, and that would be hard to explain. I think that would be hard for a lot of people to accept. Like we said before, new president, new AD, it's going to be tough to spin that to them going forward. Tony Sanchez, his biggest strength so far has been just kind of getting UNLV football back into people's consciousness and building practice facilities and infrastructure type of things. But it's got to follow with on-the-field performance. They're going to start winning some games, or else people are going to start asking questions about, can he win games?
Tony wins the offseason, right? He's a great marketer. He's a great public speaker. He's built the infrastructure up. I used an analogy earlier today where, and some people laughed at me in the newsroom back there, but a lot of previous coaches came in and they saw dirty carpet. This is not actual dirty carpet. They saw dirty carpet, Grimala, and they hired a carpet cleaning company to clean the carpet. Tony's ripped out the carpet. He's put in hardwood floors. As I said, he's got the infrastructure fixed. If he doesn't get it done this year and they bring in somebody else, whoever they bring in is getting a heck of a better situation, right? You got the practice facility. You got kids getting here in the summer to go to summer school so they can practice. The whole, they got the meal plan. The whole program looks better. They just can't win games, and part of that is because they can't stop anybody. They gave up 45 points to Howard.
And that's the thing. They don't need a ton from their defense. They don't need an excellent defense. They don't need the best defense in the league. They just need a defense that's out there, stopping people once in a while and letting Armani Rogers and Lexington Thomas and those guys score 6 and 7 touchdowns every Saturday and win you some games on offense. They just need a few stops, well-timed, force a few turnovers, and they haven't quite gotten there yet. Sanchez is going to have to get them over the hump, and if he doesn't, that's when the questions start, and that's when the seat starts to get hot. All
right, a general athletic department question here on Ask Grimala. This commenter was not a fan of the Twitter hashtag #UsNowLV, said it was bad, and could the slogan get any worse next year?
Well,
if it was Us Now RENO, that would be a disaster.
Well, the answer to the question, can it get any worse, is usually always yes. Like, it always usually can get worse. That slogan, I agree, did not quite roll off the tongue. You're more of that seems like a question you might be able to handle. Like, what can they do to market the team or to make it more interesting to fans, or what can they do to get people like out to the games, or at least excited about the teams? Because there was no one at the basketball games this season.
You know, I think a lot of it is winning. And when we went in Southern Nevada, and I say we because I've been here my whole life, right? So Tark left in 92, right? And there was a lull where folks weren't interested about UNLV basketball, and attendance dropped, and then Lon came. And what did Lon do a great job of? Marketing himself, right? There was billboards new when the Rebels were playing. There was catchy slogans. People were showing up at the MAC, and then they won a few games they weren't supposed to, right? And then all of a sudden people cared about UNLV again. And then Dave came in, and it was the tide of Tark, and everybody thought Tark was coming back, and the Mountain West had some great teams, and there were some great nights at UNLV. Well, now that's all gone. The league is awful. UNLV has no prospects, right? Everybody knew that they'd have to win the league to go to the tournament. So I think you need to win games, right? If you don't win, people aren't going to come. People aren't going to show up to watch the Rebels play just because the Rebels are playing basketball or football. You've got to be able to win games.
And that's isn't that kind of a new world for UNLV in terms of marketing themselves? Didn't UNLV used to be a program where people would come out to see them, just to see them most of the time?
Yeah, and then you see maybe like how the Golden Knights are marketing themselves, and you're like, wow, you know, the bar's been kind of set a little high in town, and UNLV just, and I don't know if it's this way now, but previously they went 2 or 3 years where they just didn't do a good job of letting us know they were playing. Turnover in the marketing department, whatever it may be. Joshua Gallegos wants to know, will Marvin Menzies go after any transfers? If so, are there names you've heard of? Too early to tell, right?
It's probably too early for that because, you know, transfers in terms of, you know, grad transfers or JUCO transfers or guys like that, those are guys that happen later in the summer when your rosters are kind of set and you know who's leaving and how many spaces you have. If you know you've got 2 scholarships more than you expected to have open, then you can say, we could use a shooter, we could use a rebounder that can play power forward, and then you can sort of target those guys on the transfer market. I don't think UNLV is at that point yet. I'm sure they're recruiting guys and they have like a pool of players that they're keeping an eye on, but I'm not sure that they've targeted anyone specifically yet to come in and play a role for them.
Yeah, I think Tony Sanchez may get some transfers first, because in the summers when some of the football guys graduate, and obviously UNLV needs help in the secondary, you could come play for UNLV and potentially get looked at to get drafted. Our best question asker, as we wrap up here on Ask Grimala, was John David 17 on Twitter. Grimala, he sent you,
in the span of 1 hour.
He sent us 14 questions. I'm going to ask you, because we've gone over a few of them. I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask for fun. And this will be our last question on Ask Grimala, unless anybody chimes in on Facebook in the next minute. But in terms of Marvin Menzies, he's been surprised with how much UNLV struggled in the Mountain West. What factors have led to this? It seems like UNLV often gets out-coached, and I know the answer to this.
It's the number one, far and away, their biggest problem in Mountain West play was their defense, and their defensive intensity and their defensive execution. It's not a roster that has a lot of strong defenders on it, or that had a lot of strong defenders on it this season individually. And Marvin Menzies, he knew that because you could see the way they tried a bunch of different things. They started the season as a man-to-man defense. They tried playing a little matchup zone. By the end of the season, when they played UNR in the Mountain West tournament, they opened the game in a straight 2-3 zone and basically said, we can't defend this team and doing any of the things we've done all season. We're going to play the simplest defense we can and hope to outscore you. So that pretty much tells you all you need to know about their ability to play defense, and that was the main problem. They just couldn't get stops when they needed them. Teams scored too easily. They gave up a lot of three-pointers and too many defensive breakdowns.
For me, historically, UNLV struggled in the Mountain West because it's tough to win on the road in the league. You go to high-elevation cities, you got to fly to Denver, drive somewhere. It's a tough league to play in. This was Ask Grimala. That's Grimala. I'm Ray Brewer, and we will see you in a month or 2 or 3 months. But if you want to talk to us, just hit Grimala up on Twitter at Mike Grimala.
You can always ask Grimala. You don't have to wait for an Ask Grimala Facebook
Yes, to
Live.
ask
You can
Grimala.
always ask Grimala.
And check LasVegasSun.com on Sunday because we'll have the answers to these questions published. Thank you all.